Chapter 18. Action Figures. Night had fallen over the forest. Fireflies flitted between the countless trees as crickets chirped in tune with one another and the rest of the Feywood's chorus of creatures. The green light of the half-full moon shone down between the leaves, replacing the earlier umber sunlight with bright viridian. Michael was just now beginning to wake up, based on the rustling Hoppe could hear from within the tent. Lance had perched back up in the tree once they had finished speaking, still looking down on the valley below. She had said that she didn't have to sleep tonight, as again, elves only needed 2 hours of rest a week on average. A fantastic evolutionary trait. Hoppe had found himself wishing that he could go as long without rest. He himself was already beginning to grow weary. How many days had he gone without sleep this time? His eyelids bore the weight of the world, it seemed, and it was a constant battle to keep them fully open. It was time to get some rest. He wouldn't try and fight against it this time. Hoplite would be removing his armor as well. He needed to get cleaned. He then entered the tent, a scream of terror tearing through the nighttime peace once Hoplite was inside. Michael stared wide-eyed at nothing, scrambling away on all fours to back himself further into the tent, continuing to scream in sheer fright. "Marine!" Hoplite yelled, moving toward the naked man's side. Michael screamed, eyes bulging as his head darted this way and that, gagging as if he had inhaled a lungful of tear gas. I can't... He managed to get out before his breathing ceased. Michael then began tearing at the canvas he had backed into, wailing through clenched teeth. Hoplite quickly bumped his chin, engulfing Michael in a brilliant white light. The Marine froze suddenly, his hyperventilation slowing fraction by fraction, until Lance rushed in through the tent, long daggers drawn and face hard. When she saw what was happening, she let out a breath, sheathing her daggers and picking up Michael's discarded blanket. She then walked over to the Marine, wrapping it around Michael's shoulders, with a sigh as the Marine hugged himself. Hoplite put a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Get a hold of yourself, Private," Hoplite said, as gently as he was able. "I can leave the light on for you. It can stay on even when I'm not wearing the helmet." Michael nodded slowly after a moment, looking up to Hoplite. "That'd be nice, sir. Thank you," he rasped. When I woke up, I thought I was back there, in the pod." He gagged. "Just give me a minute." Lance looked to Hoplite, her brows knit together and lips drawn in a tight line. She looked as concerned as Hoplite felt. This wasn't good. There would likely be missions in the future that would require them to hide in the dark, or simply sleep without any light. Well, they would need to work on getting him readjusted to normal levels of darkness again. It was as simple as that, right? Hoplite wasn't sure. He wasn't a trained psychologist. It was the best you could think of, though. Michael shuddered as if he were freezing cold, scrunching up his nose while wiping at his skin, as if something horrid clung to it. He gagged occasionally, shaking as he continued to wipe his skin and stare off into nothing. Eventually, Michael's hyperventilation slowed to an even rhythm, and he stopped wiping at his skin, placing both hands on his temples and taking a deep breath. He leaned back in the light, his long shadow copying the motion in the helmet's light. "Thank you kindly," Michael said after a long sigh. Lance suddenly stood up, and Michael looked at her with a frown. "What's up?" he asked her, eyes shifting to the still-lit helmet before back to her. "I'll be right back. I have an idea, but I'll need to run down to the camp and get something," Lance said. "Don't worry, no one will see where I came from." Hoplite paused for a moment before giving a nod. He had a feeling that he knew exactly what she was going to do. "Great, be back soon," she declared in a bubbly tone as she darted out of the tent flap. A moment of silence passed between the two men until Michael said, "I'll get over it, sir. I just gotta have some time. To just get over it. Time's the best healer, right?" Hoplite nodded. "I believe so. Will this be a problem for future missions?" Hoplite knew that it would, but it felt appropriate to ask anyway. Michael frowned, leaning forward and blowing out his lips with a long exhalation. "Probably, sir, not gonna lie," he said, his eyes darkening. Just don't take me out at night. I'll be fine during the day, but... well, I don't think I'm ready for the dark yet." Hoplite nodded, removing his helmet and placing it against the wall of the tent. Michael looked up to Hoplite's face then, his eyes widening. "Wow. Do you all got eyes like that?" Michael asked him. Hoplite blinked in confusion before replying, "Yes." That wasn't what Hoplite thought Michael would say when he removed his helmet. Hoplite had been expecting him to bring up the fact that he was now growing hair on his head and face. Hoplite himself had been more fascinated by that, considering that he hadn't felt hair on his head since before his first deployment in the field. His golden eyes had been with him ever since his first infusion. He didn't even remember what color they used to be anymore. His golden eyes may as well have been sewn into his being from birth. "So, while we wait for Lance to get done with whatever she's doing," Michael began nervously, "can you tell me how the hell you managed to murk an admech?" Hoplite blinked in surprise. That had been about 150 years ago now. Looked like it was still being talked about among their troops if Michael knew about it. Should he tell the Marine what really happened that day? Well, simply talking seemed to be calming Michael down a fair margin. Hoplite took a deep breath before he began. "I was lost in the forests of Caliston after an op went bad," Hoplite explained, receiving a nod from Michael. That day had been a nightmare for him. 3 hoplites dead and countless other soldiers with them. All save for Hoplite himself. "The admech had killed everyone sent to destroy it. All except me," he told Michael, causing the young Marine to lean forward expectantly. "I survived because I got separated from the main group. My pod and the squad with me flew off our target destination by 50 miles. Hoplite paused. "That was what saved our lives initially. The admech had a lock on both our pods in the atmosphere, and would have fired on my shuttle if everything had gone to plan," Hoplite said. "The hoplites in the targeted shuttle, they were vaporized in an instant. We never even saw where the shot had come from," he continued, his fist clenching tightly. He had known those hoplites since the training days beneath Commander. He softened his features as much as he could once he saw Michael flinch from his expression. "I wasn't wearing this phalanx model at the time. Adium plates were still in development, so I wore the standard titanium alloy version. Still should have been enough for the mission. 4 hoplites and 2 squads of Marine support crews to take out the admech while it slept." Michael gulped. "But it wasn't asleep," the Marine said quietly. Hoplite shook his head. "It wasn't." He took another deep breath. "We had thought it was. After an admech purges a world, they tend to shut down for a brief period of time. Command thought we would be able to disable it after it destroyed Caliston's human population, but it woke up sooner than expected," Hoplite explained, narrowing his eyes as he remembered the horrid biomechanical monster coming upon him and the Marine squad attached to him. "It found us soon after we crashed. It was a massacre, Private," Hoplite said, lifting his chin to stare at the ceiling of the tent. "The Marines didn't stand a chance. I didn't stand a chance." A feeling of frustration bubbled within him as he remembered just how he had defeated the admech. Michael leaned forward even further. "Sir, I don't get it. If you didn't stand a chance, how'd you beat it?" Hoplite shook his head, looking down to stare into Michael's eyes with a hard gaze. "I didn't. It shut down before it killed me, and I killed it then," Hoplite said. "It hadn't really shut down when the mission began, but it had reached that point after finding us." Hoplite's face hardened further. "I got lucky, and the Lords of the First Arm spun it as the Hoplite's superiority to final kind super soldiers, but that isn't the truth." Michael gasped and sat up straight. "So you didn't actually kill one?" Hoplite shook his head. "No, I did kill it, but it couldn't fight back." The frustration was not from denying the final kind super soldier a fair fight. Hoplite knew that no such thing existed in war. He was merely frustrated from the constant praise heaped onto him by officials and troops that didn't know the real truth of the mission. Even knowing that it was not allowed to give praise to a tool, they seemed not able to help themselves. Those that did know the truth kept their mouths shut about it, and let the hoplite continue to get praise he simply didn't deserve. At least it was just the eighth arm that thought he had destroyed it. As far as hoplite knew, it was knowledge exclusive to those who had joined the military. Hoplite could understand the reasoning for allowing the idea of his victory to spread. It was a huge morale boost for the troops. He shouldn't have cared about such things, but the praise and awe irritated him for a reason he could never explain. Perhaps it was because it was supposed to be illegal to do such a thing. Or maybe it was a leftover vestige of humanity within him. No, he was a hoplite, a tool, a thing, just as Commander had always said. So why did Hoplite let it bother him so much? Well, considering those alien freaks only had 5 of them, I still think it's cool you gotta kill one at least, Michael said, flashing a thumbs up. Hell, I still think you're cool. You know there's action figures of you, right? Or at least there were, Michael continued, scratching his beard. Had one when I was a kid even. You had bending limbs and all that, but you were wearing your classic suit and you just had the Fortis. Hoplite stared, his eyes going wide. What? He asked, a strange uncomfortable feeling welling within his chest and spreading to his face. Yeah, dude, you don't get it, sir. You were famous. You had songs about you, movies, and like I said, action figures. Michael told him in a tone that grew more excited the more he went on. How haven't you heard of that? I think everyone knows who you are. I mean, every person from every world. You were taught about in school and everything. Used as an example that the final kind's strongest soldiers still pale in comparison with our own. Hoplite blinked. That is to say, Hoplite stay frozen when not in use, Private. He explained, his face growing increasingly warm at the new information being fed to him. What was this feeling? He did not like it. And we weren't allowed to watch media of any kind. We have to stay focused on what we are. Was that why people stared at him in awe rather than avert their gazes as they did with most other hoplites he had seen? He was taught about in schools? When Twindale had healed the injury on Michael's head, the wound must have sealed wrong. Or something. Hoplite had been told it was only talked about to military staff. Had they lied to him? He hadn't cared when the Fiend Dwellers had heaped praise on him as a hero. So why should this information bother him so much? Action figures. Oh yeah, Michael said with a nod of his head. You're a celebrity, bro. Cooler than cool. Sorry, I guess I'm doing illegal stuff now too. Hoplite shook his head. Negative. I have no such status. Positive, sir. Absolutely positive. Besides, it's not like killing the Admech was the only thing you're known for. A long silence passed between the two men, both losing themselves in their own thoughts, before the quiet was interrupted by the appearance of Lance through the flap of the tent. That strange feeling in his chest and the warmth in his face still persisted, though. She was holding a glass jar in her hand, a dozen fireflies flitting here and there within. A gentle glow seeped through the glass as Lance approached Michael, handing him the jar when he stretched out his hands to take it. The young Marine smiled at the little insects gently flying about, moving back over to his bedroll and tucking himself back in, keeping the jar of insects next to his head. Thanks. Guess girls with cosmetics ain't all that bad after all, Michael said, his voice drowsy. Lance stayed with a furrowed brow as Michael passed out, the exhaustion he felt apparently being too much for his body to handle. Likely the earlier adrenaline rush had burnt out, and he had begun to crash hard. Lance then looked to Hoplite, reading his eyes before he could look away and lifting a confused eyebrow. You're embarrassed? She asked him, surprised. Why? Negative, he said simply. I just need to rest. He was embarrassed earlier? Preposterous. Right? Either way, he really did need to get some rest. The bags beneath his eyes were beginning to weigh as much as a T-57 Rhino. He reached over to his helmet, clicking it off, and seeing the little fireflies in Michael's jar dancing more clearly. The glow of the jar cast dozens of moving shadows against the floor of the tent. The glow of the jar cast dozens of moving shadows against the floor of the tent it surrounded. It made the tent feel warmer somehow. He needed to remove his armor first. He could sleep in it, but he needed to take care of other needs later, and it would need to be removed for that to happen. So he put his helmet back on and bumped his chin, the sections of armor clicking free for removal. Lance began backing out of the tent when she saw what was going on, likely still uncomfortable with nudity. "Thank you for your assistance," Hoplite told her. Lance turned to smile at Hoplite. "Of course, friend." And then she was gone out of the tent flap. Friend? Hoplite frowned as he thought on Lance's parting words. Hoplites did not and could not have friends. But he'd not correct Lance in this matter. Removing the rest of the armor was a simple process. The part he dreaded was putting it all back on later. Perhaps Michael could help him with that in the morning. Once he was free of the plate, he moved the individual sections to one corner of the tent and tucked himself into his own bedroll. He stared up at the ceiling of the tent for a long while before sleep took him, his last thoughts being of his trainer, Commander. If you're new here, welcome aboard. Check out the description for the story, and join the Discord if you like. Consider supporting the channel and the author as well. It's a dangerous world out there, but remember to be brave and look up to seek the stars.